All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Blackhawk Technical College. I've been going over the PowerPoints, the book, and writing some source code for our 152, 143, starting out with Java 6th edition book by Tony Gaddis. And I'm in Chapter 6 right now, and what I've done is rather than having to have me do a lot of typing in front of you, which I did not want to do, I have instead typed out everything, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over this, which is the payroll class, and then when I get done with that, I'm going to go over the driver for the payroll class, so you can see exactly what happens. All right? So, as mentioned at the top, I've created the payroll.java, and I put in my package, edu.blackhawk.jscott as always. I modified the comment up here, and Java payroll program for Chapter 6 of Gaddis text. This program builds on the earlier programs, adding a distinct payroll class, which is what this is, with getters and setters, among other things. All right, I've also put a lot of comment delimiters in here so you can see where stuff starts and ends. Figured that would make it easier for you to read. Now, I want to go through every line of this. So even though I'm not doing any typing, I wouldn't be surprised if this is still going to take somewhere more than a half an hour. All right, so right now, let's see. I'm a minute and a half in. So let's see as we get going just about how long this is actually going to take. I'm not going to leave that clock up here. All right, so taking it from the top, public class payroll. Okay, as we've been doing. I have the same variables that I've had before. All right, and now that I look at it, I don't know what happened to max rate, but I had all those other variables from before with hours and everything else. All right, so let's add our variable for max rate. Oops, and that was 100. So that's the maximum pay. We had the min hours and the max hours too. I don't remember. I probably didn't even use those in here. But you know what? I can add them anyway, just if for no other reason, add them for completeness sake. So we'll put in here min hours, which we had set equal to 0, and max hours, which is set equal to 84. So that's max hours. It's looking more and more like the original one, okay? We haven't used these yet, so don't worry about it. We'll get those messages there. That's not a big thing. Now, what I'm going to do is each time I create a new employee, I'm going to add 1 to an employee count. All right? And that's this variable that's right here. So let's talk about this variable. I don't think we have to talk about anything that's up till this point because it's all stuff we've gone over before in other classes. So I don't think that's an issue. But I want to talk about this. This is protected. What protected means is a let's go from the top. These are private variables right here. All right? Private variables are only available, a private variable is only available to within the bounds between this curly brace and this curly brace down at the bottom. All right? But it's not available to any outside class, and as we get going a little bit later and we start talking about things like inheritance, it's not available to any child class. All right? But if you say something is public, it's available everywhere to everyone. Well, kind of in the middle of public and private is something called protected, which means it's available everywhere inside in these curly braces and into any child class I create based off of the payroll class. Don't worry about that for now because we'll talk about it later. Also notice I'm using the word static again. You may or may not have noticed this, and I really should have brought this up, and I didn't. But in our rectangle program that we just looked at a few minutes ago, let me grab that one back up again. The rectangle.java. Do you notice what we don't have in here? The word static is not in here at all. Okay? It's gone. But if we bring up our rectangle demo, there's static again because main has to be static and everything is in main. We bring up room areas. They're static again because everything's inside of main. All right? So what I'm trying to tell you is as we write more complex programs, what is going to end up happening is we're not going to be concerned so much with things being static, except in a case like this. If I left off static here and I created 5 employees, all right? If you leave off the word static, every time this would be every time I would call this code, it would create a brand new variable called count and initialize it to 0. So if I had 5 employees, it would be the equivalent of having 5 counters, each with a value of 1, as opposed to having 1 counter with a value of 5. Okay? You'll also notice that all of my variables are now instance variables, so they're all defined at the top of the program, as are my constants. So define program, let's say program constants. And we'll come down here and we will define our instance variables. All right, most of the, I guess everything else that's in here, you already know what it is. We've already talked about first name, last name, hours, rate, gross, and tote gross. There's nothing new in there. Now remember, when we end up creating a class, what ends up being called is what's known as the constructor. So I've got a constructor down here, the first of what? First of 2 constructors. So if we pass nothing in, do we have an empty? Yep, there. If we pass nothing into our constructor, we set the first name equal to FN for first name unknown. We set the last name to LNU for last name unknown. We set the hours and rate both equal to 0. Now, did we have to do it like that? No, but that's just the way I did it. And we add 1 to our count. So that's the no-arc constructor. So that's the constructor we call if we pass in no variables. We've also got another constructor where we pass in a string for our first name, a string for our last name, a string for our hours, and a double for our hours, and a double for our rate. We again add 1 to our count, and then we do a little bit of checking here. This line right here, I'm going to go over it in a second. Notice I put this down below it in comments, in a multi-line comment. This line right here could have been rewritten as all of this. All right, and that should say FN there. What this says right here is, all right, for the first name, if I passed in nothing, I'm going to end up setting my first name to FNU unknown, which is a dumb name, but you get it. So this says if this right here, what you see in blue, says, hey, for the first name, which is FN, if I didn't leave it blank, then take whatever I passed in and assign that to first name. But if I did leave it blank, then pass FNU unknown into first name. So this line 47, could have been rewritten as lines 50 through 57. So I wrote 1 line as opposed to writing 8 lines. So I'm starting to do a little bit of stuff in here. All right, and as I go, I'm sure I'm going to be changing this a little bit. So hours, what did we say? Min hours is 0. So, all right. So we do a similar type of thing in here with last name that we just did for first name. So I can, again, copy this stuff that's right here. hit enter a couple times, paste that in, change this to L, last, L, last, and L. I'm just trying to show you what we could do because there's multiple ways of writing the same thing. All right. Then we've got our hours and our rate. So what I should have said here is if hours are greater than or equal to min hours, and our hours are less than or equal to max hours, we'll fix that in just a second. So that's greater than or equal to, and that's less than or equal to. And it looks like I'm missing a, let's see, boom, 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 boom. One more here. All right, so this says with hours, if we passed in an hours that is between 0 and 84, take that variable that we passed in and assign it to hours. But if we passed in something that's out of range, so it's either less than 0 or it's greater than 84, just assign 0 to hours. And in much the same way, we can come in here with our rate, and we can say if rate is greater than or equal to min rate, and rate is less than or equal to max rate, same thing. So this, what we're doing here inside of our constructor is we are literally doing some validation. So in other words here, whoops, validate last name. This is validate first name. This is add 1 to employee counter. All right. And again, this is a shortcut for all of this, and this is a shortcut for writing all of this. All right, so then we want to come through here, and again, we want to now validate hours. And finally, we want to come in here, and we want to validate our rate. Our hourly rate and our hours worked. So I'm putting in a lot of documentation in here. So, and notice I put in Java doc comments so you can see what this stuff looks like. It doesn't make the program run any better to do that. Okay? You could even make the case that it probably runs worse because I put that stuff in there as opposed to running better. All right. So that's my first constructor, and I put a lot of comments in there so you can see what's going on. Again, I use the Java doc param comments to show the parameters. All right, here's my no-arc constructor. So again, increment, employee counter, and here, no validation. Rather, just set instance variables to default values. Okay? All right, then I've got my getters and setters. Get first name, which is going to return first name, which is a string. Get last name, so I've got all my getters together. Get last name, which is going to return a string, which is going to be last name. And again, first name and last name were both defined up on top, our instance variables, as strings. All right. Then we've got our hours worked, which is a double, get hours. And we've got our get rate, which is a double for rate. We've also got our get gross, which is going to, again, either do our non-overtime or our overtime, and it's going to add to our total gross counter, and then it's going to return gross. Gross has got to be a double because we're returning a double. So here, figure out gross pay based on no overtime worked. And this will be figure out gross pay based on some overtime worked. All right. This will be increment total gross accumulator, and then we'll return our gross. All right. So that's get gross pay, and this get gross is going to return the total gross pay of all employees. So return gross pay and return total gross pay of all employees. You notice that when we are doing, other than this get gross, and again, we're doing it like that so we don't have any stale data, but other than that, every other get routine, there's no calculations being done. It's simply a return. What you're hopefully noticing in here is, other than this get gross, which takes up about a screen's worth, the size of most of these routines, even with comments, is less than 10 lines. All right, then we've got our get count to give us our employee count. And then we've got our setters. So set the first name, set the last name, set the hours worked, and I'm going to change this so it looks like the one up above, because again, previously I did not use all of those constants, which I should have done. So that's for the hours worked. So that fixes that. And then we've got to do something similar down here for the hourly rate. Down here. And when you look, that's everything. That's the end of our class. So with comments, I've now bumped this up to 235 lines. But ideally, you're going to be able to take a look at this, and I've structured it in such a way that it'll make sense to you, and you'll be able to work with it accordingly. So talking about that stuff took about 20 minutes. All right, so let's go and look at the driver, which is the other part of the program right now. So like I said, I believe everything in here I've kind of commented up the wazoo, and I think it's all okay. So I'm going to come back to the driver. All right, this may or may not make as much sense as what we just looked at. Okay, so I'm importing my decimal format, and I'm importing the option pane, and you'll see those in just a minute. All right, and I've got public void main. I'm not even going to worry in here. I'm not doing anything now with the with files. Okay, so there were a total of this many employees. Well, what it should say is how many employees were there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it should say there were a total of 5 employees. That's what it should say there. All right, then we set up our decimal formatter, and really could have made that line first, I guess. I probably could have reversed these two. The total gross pay, that should add up the gross pay for all employees. All right, now we're coming in here and we're creating all of those employees. Now please play computer here with me and look at this. For the first employee, which is Jeff, let's make that a little d. Okay, I'm sure I'm gonna have to change some of those later. Yeah. All right, so I changed them all. All right, so taking it from the top, Jeff is going to be a payroll object, so create a new payroll object, and we're passing in as parameters a string, really what is a double, even though I didn't put the 0.0 there, and a double. So the system is going to go and look for a constructor in our payroll file that has a string, and a couple numbers. So it comes in here and it says, okay, here's our first constructor. Oh, a string, a number, and a number. Good. So it comes in and it says, okay, Jeff is going to be the first parameter, Scott is going to be the second. So it says, all right, so the first name, it's not empty, so we're going to take Jeff and we're going to assign that to first name. The last name is also not empty, so we're going to take Scott and assign that to last name. All right, that brings us down to here. Then it says we're going to take 40, and that 40 is going to be assigned to hours. Is the hours greater than or equal to, so is 40 greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 84? Yes, it is. So we take hours, which is 40, which is now an H, and we assign that to our hours variable. Finally, we come in here and we take 20.0. All right, we take 20.0, and that one should be a capital D, I'm sorry. That 20.0, that gets put in there as rate. So, is rate greater than or equal to 10 and less than or equal to 100? All right, where did I get those values from? 10 and 100, 0 and 84. All right, and I guess I should have had hours before. In which order did I do it in? We do hours before rate. So there. Hours, rate. Good. Okay. All right. So we've got our last one, like I said, which is what? Our last one, which is our rate, which was 20. Which does fall within the range. So we take that 20 and we assign that to rate. Okay? All right, that's the first thing we've done. Okay? So then we've got another one in here, Doug. And you can see it's going to be done the same way. It's going to take the Doug and put it in for first name, the Tabit, and Doug's the guy I used to work with, and put it in for last name, the 50 for hours worked, and the 20 for hourly rate. So what am I testing here? Valid first name, valid last name, valid non-overtime hours, valid rate. Valid first name, valid last name, overtime hours worked, and hourly rate. Then we create two more, and both of these have problems. This is called bad hours, so that's the name of the employee. Bad hours, and the next one is bad rate. Bad will be the first name, hours will be the second name. But notice, for the hours, it's -10. -10 there does not fall within our range. It's not greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 84. So what that should do is that should take 0 and assign 0 to hours. That one right there should assign a 0 to hours. And we've got a valid here rate, which is 20. But now we do the kind of the opposite here. Now we've got a valid hours, but we've got an invalid rate. So bad rate right here, that's going to assign bad to first name, rate to last name. 40.0, which is valid, it's going to assign that to the hours. But remember, our hourly rate has to be between 10 and 100. This does not meet that criteria. So it should go in there in that last one. It should go in and it should set that rate equal to 0. if we've done this correctly. Then we've got, we'll call this here emp. And that's going to be an empty employee with nothing in there. Why do we have this guy? Payroll with nothing in it. Because one of the things that we put in here was our constructor with nothing passed. Always, always, always make sure when you're doing this stuff, you want to always make sure that you come in, and it looks like I've got some kind of an error in here, but I'll fix that. I got to change that to emp. I shouldn't go playing with names after I've created a program, but I have. All right. So this should call the parameterless constructor. All right. Then we just print out all of the information. So notice there's the payroll object Jeff info, and I printed all of them out in message dialogues. That's just about the rest of it. Then I used the system.out.println line, but we'll add a message dialog for that one too in just a minute. All right. So what do we have here? Taking it from the top. First name. So this line right here, that line should print Jeff. That should print Scott. That should print 40. That should print 20. And that should print 800. 40 times 20. All right. That should print Doug. That should print Tabit. That should print 50. That should print 20. And with his overtime, that should print 1100. Then, for the bad hours, that should print bad because that's what we put in for the first name. Hours for the last name. Hours worked should have been reset to 0. Hourly rate was valid. I think we set that to like 20. There it is. But 0 times 20 should give us 0 for our gross. All right, then we've got the bad rate. Should have bad for the first name, rate for the last name, 40 for the hours, 0 for the rate because we put in an invalid rate. And 40 times 0, and I took that from right here. So 40 times 0 should give us 0 for their gross. So far we've got 800, we've got 1100, which gives us 1900, 0, and 0. So we've got 1900 still. All right, then we come to our empty constructor. That'll give us FN unknown for the first name, LN unknown for the last name. I think we set it, what did we set in here? Zero and 0 for hours and rate. So that should be 0 for the hours, 0 for the rate, and 0 times 0, of course, is 0. All right, that should be everything. Just lining stuff up here again. It goes back to my anal retentive nature. Makes it much easier for me when I'm doing all this stuff to try to see what goes with what. All right, so that should all print out in option panes, okay? And then we come out to the bottom, and on our screen, we print out there were a total of, and notice I'm saying Doug.count. What the heck does that mean? Why Doug.count? Because remember, this variable that we created in here, count, we made it static. So we don't need to create some special anybody can call that variable. In other words, that can be, I could put that Doug.count, or I could put that Jeff.count, or Doug.count, or badhours.count, or .count, or badrate.count, or empty emp.count. So that should say there were a total of 5 employees. The total gross pay, again, it should say there for that $1,800. $1,900, I'm sorry. Then end of program run. Let's grab and try to do one more thing in here. All right, I'm going to have one more J option pane. I'm going to say here, final payroll info. All right. And I'm going to try to put the same stuff that I've got down here. So I'm going to copy it, paste it in. Again, it'll look a little funky for a minute, but we'll fix it. All right, plus, so there were a total of Doug.count employees. All right. And I don't want this there. There were a total of, and I'll put another plus sign there. It'll all come out in the wash when we get done here in just a second. The gross pay was, all right, the gross pay, and another plus sign there. And then end of program run. And you notice how all of the stuff that was there, our errors went away. So let's save this. All right. It says count should be accessed in a static way. I'm not sure exactly what they mean by that. Void is static. Well, it's a warning, not an error. So we've saved everything. So let's go back and do another run. Run. There's me. All right, Jeff Scott, 40 hours, $20 an hour, gross pay $800. There's Doug. Doug Tabbitt, 50, 20, and $1,100, because remember, 10 of those hours were paid at the overtime rate. Okay? Then there's bad hours. Notice how it reset hours worked to 0, which made our gross pay 0. Then there's bad rate, which again set our rate to 0, and since our hours were 40, 40 times 0 is 0. Then our empty, which showed our FN unknown, LN unknown, 0 and 0, and 0 times 0 is 0. So our final, there were 5 employees. The total gross pay was $1,900, and end of program run. Everything looks good. Make a couple more very, very superficial little changes in here. Let's see. I'd like another \n right here. All right. And it's looking pretty doggone good right now. I want to take just a couple more minutes and go over everything one last time, starting with our payroll class. All right. So our package statement, a Java doc comment at the top. Okay. Our variables are first our constants, and our variables, we could really call these instance constants, because I guess each instance is going to get a copy, but technically not. I like it better the other way. Let's keep them as program constants. Same ones we've been using, same variables we've been using, but each time we create an employee, each employee will have their own first name, last name, hours, rate, gross. Then we went in and we did our constructor with everything passed in. All right. And we added one to our counter. We validated our first name. We said if it was empty, assign FN unknown to the first name. Otherwise, whatever we passed in there to FN, assign that to first name. We did the same thing with last name. If we passed in something valid, assign that to last name. If there was nothing passed in there, assign LNU to last name. And I showed you that using that ternary operator, that question mark colon operator, I have to stop for just a second. Sorry. All right, sorry about that. So remember, using this ternary operator says if it's true, you do what comes after the question mark. If it's false, you do whatever comes after the colon. Okay? And this ternary operator in line 50 is a shortcut for what we did in here. Same kind of thing for here being a shortcut for what we did in here. Let me make sure I turn the recorder back on. And I did. All right. Then we also validated our hours worked with another ternary operator and our hourly rate with another ternary operator. All right, so that was our constructor where we passed in everything. All right, we also had a constructor where we passed in nothing, also known as our no-arg constructor. And in there, we again incremented our count, but then we set all of our instance variables just to defaults. FN unknown, LN unknown, 0 and 0. All right, then we had our getter. Remember, getters must return a type, and that type must be, the type we specify must be the same type as the type of variable. Get first name, get last name, get hours, get rate. Those are just simple return, 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 return. Then our gross, but to avoid that stale data, I did the calculations in here. So there's our gross for no overtime. There's our gross for overtime. Regardless of whether or not they had overtime, we take their gross, we add it to our total gross counter, and we return gross up above. All right? And then we've got our get total gross and our get count. Then we've got our sets. And notice that with each one of these sets, that are literally just a line of code, assigning first name to whatever we passed in, assigning last name to whatever we passed in. We're again doing validation in here if we wanted to, and it wouldn't be a bad idea. Just like we did in here with that ternary operator for first name and last name, really would have been a good idea to grab that and put that in here. Okay. And this is going to have to be F then. F and F. All right. And then do the same thing for our last name. What I'm trying to get across to you is what I consider to be good programming habits, and that you start to get those good programming habits from the beginning. Okay, that'll have to be L and L. All right. Then we set our hours. Again, we're validating our rate, and again, we're validating. That was everything. From there, we went back into our driver. And in our driver, we created 5 different program objects. All right, and really, I probably should take these 2 lines that are right here, and even though they worked fine where they were, put them down here. Okay, I think it looks a little better down there. So we created a Jeff, which was all valid stuff, a Doug, which was all valid stuff, a bad hours, which was valid first and last name, invalid hours, and a valid rate, and a bad rate, which had a valid first name, a valid last name, all right, a valid hours, but an invalid rate. Then we created an empty employee that didn't have anything passed in. This came out and said we had a total of 5 employees. And notice when I did it here, I said payroll.count. That's the name of the class. All right? And payroll.totalgross. That's what I think it actually wanted down here, where it gave us the Doug dot. I think if I change this to payroll here and here. All right, now notice that all of my warning messages have gone away. All right, then we just printed out the information. There were a total of 5 employees. The total gross pay was $1,900. We printed out all the Jeff information, and we did all of that inside of a message dialog. Then had message dialogues for Doug. And that should say right there, D. And we had printed out for bad hours and for bad rate and for our empty employee. Then we printed some final payroll stuff, and we also, we did all that stuff in a show message dialog box, and then we also printed some final stuff on the screen. So if I save this and run it one more time, Jeff, all valid. Doug, all valid. Bad hours, invalid. So the hours work set to 0, which set our gross pay to 0. Bad rate. Since we had a bad rate, it got reset to 0. So 40 times 0 made our gross pay 0. And our default constructor, which set our first name to FN unknown, our last name to LN unknown, and everything else to 0. 0 times 0 gave us 0 here. There's our final payroll info. 5 employees, gross pay $1,900, end of payroll run. And if we look down at the bottom, 5 employees, total gross pay. Well, something's goofed up there, so I'll have to fix that. Oh, because we hadn't set it yet. All right, there were 5 total employees. Total gross pay is 19, end of program run. So in other words, this line that we put up higher on in the program, this, where it said gross pay, we hadn't figured out the gross yet. That's why it said it was 0 down here. So we don't really even need these lines because we're already printing them. So let's save, and let's do one more run. Valid, valid, has an invalid, default constructor, boom. There's our stuff, and there's our stuff down here. All right. Again, there were 5 employees, $1,900, end of program run. Now, there's one last thing that I want to show you here. All right, just one more thing. I'm going to grab these 2 files. What I'm going to do now may not make sense, but there's as always, there's a method to my madness. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these 2 files, here and here, and I'm going to copy them to the clipboard. All right. Then I'm going to come out here to the C drive. Go to Program Files, go to Java, go to Bin. I'm going to put a folder here that's called Jeff. And under that folder, I'm going to drop those 2 files in there. And I'm going to show you how I can also compile these from the command line. Okay? So I want to show you this 2 ways. The first way, whoops, that's not what I wanted. I didn't want to show you a calculator. All right. So I have to change to the C drive, CD to Program Files, CD to Java, JDK 1.8 star, CD to Bin, CD to Jeff. All right. Now, if I want to compile this, I can say, let's see, Java C for Java compile, // payroll. I might get an error message here. .java. Java C not recognized. Well, that isn't good. // Java C payroll .java. All right, so that's the first file. Notice it made my payroll class for me. Remember, that went through the compilation file and it did this. So it went through the compilation or compile, and it did this. Now if I do the other one, and I change this to Chapter 6, oops, Payroll driver.java, now it found some mistakes. 14 errors, and it just ran. Well, that's interesting. It's got a whole bunch of stuff it doesn't like in here, and I have no idea whatsoever why. That compiled just fine, but now it's not finding all sorts of stuff. Anytime I'm referencing payroll now, it's not finding it, even though we've got that file there. So I'm going to try one more thing. I don't think this is going to work, but I'm going to try to compile them in the other order. Wow, this is very surprising. Okay. Man. You know what? Payroll is the one that's got all my stuff in there. No, that's the one that didn't work. Yeah, it works. All right. I'm going to show you this. You might say, what are you even doing, Jeff? Please bear with me for just a second, because I need the exact command here. What I want to show you is what it looks like when you compile with java.comments. And I need that line that shows me, because it's in this particular thing right here. It shows you how to compile with java., because I always forget. Boy, where are you? There, they've already done it. Somewhere in this mess, it's going to show me the line that I need to put in. There it is. All right. So I come back to where I just was. I don't know. I guess I closed. No, I guess I closed that. So now I want to run this command. It's going to have to change because that's the wrong name. So I want to say javadoc minus version minus author, but not train.java, but I want to say here payroll.java. I'm sorry, it's .javadoc. I hope it's here. ./javadoc. Yes. All right. Why did I go through all this trouble at the end? Was I trying to waste your time or mine? No. These are all the files that just got added in here. And I want to show you the index file. I can use index, and probably index all. These are what got created when I did the javadoc comments. Notice count. Notice all of that that's in there. It's all hyperlinked. So if I go to count, it shows me in detail all the different stuff that I've got in here. So these are my javadoc comments that I created. All this stuff got created for me automatically by me putting in those comments. And when I say those comments, I mean the ones that started like this and ended like that. All right, I'll try to remember to show you that in class also. That may have seemed like a big waste of your time. Believe me, I really and truly hope it was not. All right? All right, so that's it for the programmatic part of Chapter 6.